Recording. All
All right.
right.
Okay, so we are going to go over our group assignment and just talk about the answers we came up with and what we're going to include in our paper. So
Cool.
let's go ahead and start with section 1 from the module, the initial thoughts. So question A says, what kind of information would best help Ms. Begay evaluate her students' learning? So what did you end up getting for that?
Yeah, I think progress reports from our prior teachers, kind of getting a background on the kids and how they behaved and performed in the class, and then maybe a little background on the family life and just how they're raised. Like, do they come from a stable household, a broken family? Like, kind of a little bit about themselves, you know?
Right, and then I've kind of added to that, monitoring our students' progress throughout the year, of course, going over our previous test scores. If they had an IEP, they would obviously want to, include that with their research. It's a good way for the teacher to evaluate her own teaching, right, and kind of see what she needs to do better or do differently, you know.
Sure.
That kind of information. If they're a better visual learner, or do they learn like by saying it, like linguistically? Do they work better with small groups, or are they working better by themselves? Like that kind of information could all help
Yeah,
whoever
absolutely.
is just kind of evaluate her teaching style and evaluate how the student's learning.
For sure.
Okay. So question B, why is it important for Ms. Begay to be aware of her students' progress?
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of self-explanatory. Kind of just make sure that they're maintaining learning and making progress and um, just building on the learning process, you know?
All right. She'll get a better idea of the students, what they need to improve academically versus the fact that they're struggling. Like, what are they struggling with? What specifically? She'll have feedback. She'll be able to use that information if she needs to change her lessons around if she needs to.
For sure. Absolutely. All right. And then the third part of that, what steps can Miss McGay take to monitor her students' progress throughout the year? I think it'd be good for her to continue to work individually with the students, to kind of get a feel for how they're doing, set small goals for them to attain. Kind of very similar to what we talked about at the end, the kind of the CBM model.
Oh yeah, that kind of does tie in. Yeah, I was just gonna say she can monitor her progress, which is basically the CBM model, keeping a record of their work and their test results. I mentioned like having some sort of filing, organizing system, right? Every student has their folder or their file.
Right.
So just in case she needs to use it in a meeting or something, she can easily like stay organized with their stuff and just pull up the students' test scores and
Yeah.
make meetings go a lot smoother.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so now we are on the assessment section, talking about progress monitoring and the advantages over annual achievement tests.
Right. I think a couple advantages are allows them to focus on small attainable goals rather than being overwhelmed with the big picture. Sometimes it gets tough, and let's see, it makes stuff more personalized rather than standardized, because each person is different. And lastly, there's another point, the CBM model. The results are kind of more visual, that you can easily see those on a graph continuously throughout the year and kind of see where your student's at that day rather than waiting for 6 to 9 months at the end of the year.
Um, Yeah, it also gives them a better evaluation on like how effective their lessons are. Because, like you said, they'll get their results more frequently, so they can easily figure out or detect whether or not a certain type of teaching method or way that she's, um, having the students practice it, or the type of exam she can, determine the effectiveness of that a lot easier versus getting those results like twice a year. She's not going to really know if her methods are working or not before it might be too late.
Yeah, for sure.
Two differences between mastery measurement and CBM.
All right. Well, mastery measurement kind of focuses on one specific skill for a certain amount of time, for example, a month or a week or 2 weeks, whereas CBM kind of focuses on a wide array of skills throughout the entire school year. So they kind of get a better basis and they're working on it for a longer period of time. Because, I mean, from my experience doing the mastery, like I'd take a test, I'd study hard for a test, more to like memorize. I'd pass the test and then I'd forget it, So um, I think CBM is good because you understand it and you know it rather than just learning it, or rather than just memorizing it for 2 weeks to pass the test.
Right. And we kind of will get caught up as a student, you kind of get caught up in that cycle, study for it, memorize it, get a test, pass the test, forget about it because you're moving on to the next thing.
Right.
It's kind of the mastery measurement is just like more specific. CBM allows more creativity
Yeah.
in how you teach it, what order you teach it in, how much time you spend on a certain topic. Because maybe certain topics require different types of tests. I feel like mastery measurement has, kind of a rooted style in the way you kind of give those exams. And
Right.
as a student, that can be kind of, same thing over and over again. They might get bored, might not
Right.
interest in it because they know it's going to be the same thing over and over again. So
Right.
that's an advantage that CBM I feel like has over mastery measurement.
Yeah, and like the mastery measurement, it's coming, so you're going to study the same way every time.
Right.
CBM, like you said, the creativity is huge. Like, be able to use more of your brain while you're doing that, both sides.
Right. Okay. Part C.
All right.
Describe 3 ways CBM can be used for at-risk students.
Let's see. All right. Let's see. You're going to identify where those students are having the most difficulty, kind of where their problem areas are. You can locate the students who aren't making progress and refer them to certain placement if necessary. Kind of makes it easier for that. And then, kind of like you mentioned earlier, uh, effectiveness in teaching strategies and kind of being able to either change or continue with the methods that you're using currently.
Yeah, I mean, those are the 3 ways that they can. I mean, that's pretty much it right there. We can move on to the next one.
All right, you got the 6-step CBM process.
Step 1, create or select the appropriate test. Step 2, administer and score. Step 3, put them on some sort of visual, thing that can help you, evaluate where your students are and how they're improving or regressing. So some sort of graph. Step 4, use the scores and kind of create personalized goals, based on how the students are progressing. Like, let's say a student, isn't progressing as much as you expect them to, but you can adjust, their goals to keep the students confident that they can reach those goals, versus everybody needs to learn all their multiplication facts by the end of the month. That just puts more pressure on the students.
Right.
So step 4 is set goals. Step 5, make instructional decisions, based on those goals and based on how students are doing over a longer period of time. If a student isn't improving at all, you might want to, recommend tutoring
Whoops.
in school. And then step 6, communicate that progress, parent-teacher meetings, meetings with other teachers on your team, principals, just make sure that you're not the only one that has that information.
Perfect. Cool. And lastly, kind of the detail part, step E, how would you use CBM when teaching basic multiplication facts? Describe what you would do for each of the 6 steps.
So do you want to kind of split this one up, because this one's kind of longer?
Yeah, sure.
I like an example of like how we would do it just based off like, okay, let's do it for multiplication facts.
Okay.
So step 1 was create and select the appropriate test. So whatever type of test you want to use, I've seen teachers, give a quiz and they would just have them fill out a blank multiplication chart.
Right.
Just like from 1 to 12, or you can make it like a 1-minute timed, see how many multiplication problems you can answer correctly type thing. Whatever you don't finish will be graded, something like that. So whatever test would work the best for, your students, you have some sort of variety in that. You can decide whether or not you want like 2 quizzes in a day, in a week, or, 1 test at the end of every month. I prefer, maybe 1 every Friday.
Yeah.
It will give you some structure. It will allow students to, structure how they're going to study. Like it can make students more organized, knowing that they have that test on Friday and they need to be ready for it every Friday.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, I like the competitive portion. So like kind of being timed on the clock, knowing that you're like working against something, or like I know in high school, you're not really graded on a curve as much, or at least what I'm familiar with, like K through 12 is not as much of a curve. In college, it's occasionally a curve, which is kind of like you're competing with the class.
Right.
But I really like the minute time, see how many questions you could get finished with that. Kind of gets your different parts of the brain going because there's pressure, the time's going.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not going to work for all students, but it's a pretty good baseline at least.
Right. Okay, step 2, how would we administer and score the probes? I mean, there's really not that many different ways you can, administering it, we kind of talked about, the different types of ways you can give the test, but,
Right.
Especially for something like math, when
Yep.
the answer is either right or it's wrong, for
Right.
something like language arts, you're writing the creative writing thing that can, vary a little bit. You might do some peer review, but for something like multiplication facts, you either got it or you don't.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, that one's pretty self-explanatory.
Right.
Step 3, which is pretty much visually display the scores. Yeah, kind of like what's mentioned. Just making a simple, kind of clear chart as to where everybody is.
Right.
Although I know in this culture, like people don't want to, I don't know, maybe like kind of in a confidential manner where it's individualized. So you give maybe your student based on the other class without any other names on there.
Yeah.
Kind of see where they stand in the class, but not throwing anyone else under the bus.
And yeah, so maybe because I know today, like almost all the teachers have an online type of program where they can enter grades and, the parents can log on and track their kids' progress too.
Okay.
But, we still want to for me at least, I would want to give immediate feedback to the students.
Yeah.
Just to kind of, for me, it would help, seeing their reaction to their scores.
Right.
There might be a student, who doesn't do too well on the test that might not care. They might they might show it in their face like it doesn't really matter to them. That might be something that I would want to know.
Right.
A student that's like so close to reaching their goal and it's really like it's eating at them and they're emotional about it. You kind of want to know those things, how serious they're taking it.
Right.
And adjust your expectations, and you can adjust the way you help them out in the future.
Absolutely.
So still kind of figuring that part out in terms of how I would give their scores back. But online, definitely you still want to have some sort of confidential way. Not everyone needs to know everyone's scores.
Right. But it's good to know how to like approach each student and where their motivation comes from, and like if they care or not,
Old school, take the test and fold it in half when the student gets that grade. Just give them
yeah. All right, step 4, let's see, setting goals. I think this one's super important. I think it's always good to strive for something, some sort of realistic goal, or else like, what's the point? Like, why am I taking this class? Why? I think it's really important to know the why, and setting goals helps that. So yeah, like I think it says like kind of based on their test scores, like they either improve or continue with what they're doing, or maybe the teacher, based on how the student's doing, can make it more difficult or maybe a little simpler, kind of break it down a little bit.
Right. And then like for me specifically, since I'm like doing younger grades, like elementary school, having some sort of reward system.
Yeah.
You reach a certain goal, you get something, maybe extra recess or
Heck yeah.
give them some reason to like, why do I want to do better in math?
Yeah.
You might not realize it, so early, the importance of it, but we can still get them to take it seriously, and they'll realize how important it is later on in life.
For sure.
But some sort of something that they can work for, something that they can have in their head, like, okay, I really want to reach my goal, so I can get this, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So,
I like it.
Step 5. What is step 5? Make instructional decisions. Okay, so we kind of talked about this earlier, like some of those students that might not improve as at the same rate as the rest of the class, wherever they started, showing minimal improvement. Everyone's practicing the same way, and the student still seems to not be getting it.
Right.
I would make sure, the big thing for me is just to make sure you have enough of a time frame to determine that they're not going to improve at the rate as the rest of the class, because you can't really make that decision based off like 2 tests, right? If you only take 2 tests and he's not improving, you can't make that big decision like, okay, we need to set up a meeting, the student needs tutoring, blah blah. You have to make sure, okay, over the course of a month or 2 or this semester, the student's shown that he hasn't really improved at the rate that we expect him to, and then we can, depending on the student and the grade level, it might be a conversation with that student. It might be a conversation with the student in the email to the parent.
Right.
Depending on how severe it is, like, are you getting the basic stuff, or is it, that you just seem to not be caring? That determines whether the method of how we communicate that to them. But if you're in the school, there's going to be resources for stuff like that you're obviously going to know about. If you have a learning center, where students could get extra help, after school tutoring, if it's extra help, if some extra homework every night, there's something that can be done.
Right.
Those types of students, it's
Sure.
just on the student and their level and how much they need to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this kind of ties into what we talked about at the beginning. section, the first section of like kind of knowing the student's background and where they're coming from. So maybe like they're acting a certain way because of how they were raised or what they're going through, certain traumas. Um, and so maybe they may need a different type of attention. Maybe they're just, I don't know, brain's a little cloudy because they're dealing with stuff, you know?
Right. That you have to take that part into account too, and that can still affect the way you communicate it to them.
Yeah, for sure.
Family life is, kind of kind of rocky. You know, you might not want to call the parents all the time, like, "Hey, your student failed another math test. Why don't you come in and we'll talk about it?" There's certain things you have to take all that stuff into account.
Yeah, absolutely.
Communicate it.
All right. Step 6 is communicate progress. Uh, yeah, I think this one is after all the evaluation, after all the visual stuff, all the analysis, is just communicating, which is might be one of the more important parts once you've done your research. Okay, now you talk to the student if they need help, or you talk to the parents, or you talk to the counselors, kind of like what we spoke about in the prior step, to kind of figure out what everyone feels is the best spot to help each individual kid receive their, or like get their peak performance or max performance in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. There's, it's just a matter of how you choose to communicate it. There's plenty of different ways, whatever works for you and the student based off their situation. That's just the decision that each teacher, is going to have to make. And it's going to be different every time.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And I think that covers it.
Is that it? All right. I'm going to hit stop right now.